Over the years, the Minecraft PvP community has grown into likely the largest Minecraft community of all time, with millions of players and tens of thousands of servers taking part. But of all of those millions of players, there are very few that actually understand how Minecraft PvP works at its core, and players are always looking for ways to improve. So today, after wanting to make a video like this for about 2 years now, I've finally gotten around to it. The ultimate guide to the art of Minecraft PvP. In this video, we'll be going over clutches, movement, sprint resets, projectiles, archery, click speed, height advantages, end crystals, and more to provide hopefully one of the most in-depth guides to Minecraft PvP there is. Let's get started. A big part of modern PvP is something I often see get overlooked. You can find tons of montages on it with millions of views, but if you want a tutorial or explanation, there's just a few out there that'll help you. Of course, I'm talking about clutching, a somewhat niche part of PvP, but one that's extremely important depending on the game mode you play. There are a large variety of different clutches, but we'll be going over 3 in this video. Fall clutches, block clutches, and pearl clutches. Let's start with block clutches, which are both very easy and very important in almost every game mode. These can be used to keep you alive if you get knocked off a map, to jump across big gaps quickly without bridging, to drop down to the ground without taking lots of fall damage, and so on. To perform a basic block clutch, you'll want to aim at the side of a block below you and right-click to place a block on it. These are pretty easy and pretty common, so you'll get used to them quickly and they might even become a regular strategy for you if you're an avid player of island-based games like Sky Wars, Bed Wars, Capture the Wool, Stick Fight, and so on. Now, if you're looking for a bit more of a challenge, try practicing extensions, which are basically multiple block clutches. It's actually possible to block clutch by a lot more than just one block depending on the circumstances. The world record for this is over 40 blocks, but the most I've ever seen in normal gameplay is about 3 or 4 blocks straight and 5 or 6 blocks diagonally. These are much more difficult to accomplish, and for longer extensions, high CPS is a must. I'll talk more about CPS later in the video though, so let's focus on the clutch itself. I can't give you a lot of tips, but one thing I will say is that you'll want to move your aim down further as you place the blocks. Look adjacent to the platform at first so you can start the clutch easily, then look downwards at the end so you can place the final block under you instead of in front of you. Now let's move to fall clutches, which you might not recognize. Don't worry, you've probably seen one of these before by a different name, like an MLG clutch or a water bucket clutch. But water buckets are far from the only thing you can use to break your fall. Just to name a few, cobwebs, ladders, and slime blocks can all prevent a big drop from killing you, and they all have their uses. Water is the most common method as it's the original fall clutch and by far the most well known. You'll be seeing it used most often in game modes like Sky Wars, where there's lots of big jumps, and UHC, where it's vital to take as little damage as possible throughout the game. Short falls are very easy to clutch. Just place the water when you're about 2 or 3 blocks from the ground, then make sure to pick it up afterwards. It might take a few tries, but you'll catch on quickly. Larger falls, on the other hand, can be much more difficult. You can try to time the clutch, but you might be falling faster than your reflexes can handle. You could also try to spam click on the ground to place the water as soon as possible, but it's possible to place the water and pick it up on accident before you hit the ground, which will still kill you. Each person is different, so you'll have to practice on your own, but I personally like to spam the water and stop quickly, as I don't click very quickly and I'm not usually fast enough to accidentally pick it back up. Cobwebs, slimes, and other blocks all function very similar, although you don't need to time those. But what if you don't have a flat ground to clutch on? Well, in that case, you'll want to try ladder clutches. While they're much more difficult, they're also very cheap to perform and always look impressive, especially if you do one on flat ground by placing a block and then a ladder. The best tip that I can give is to try to stay as far away as possible from the ladder's intended destination. If you're too close, it's much harder to place the ladder, and you might even accidentally land on top of the ladder and die of fall damage either way. And finally, let's go over pearl clutches, which are in my opinion the hardest by far. There's not much in the way of tips for pearl clutches either, as it very much depends on your circumstances. I will say that you'll always want to throw the pearl a little bit higher than the platform you want to land on, but that's pretty basic advice and you probably already know that. Another thing I'll suggest is to get ready for the landing. In game modes like Skywars, you might not be able to throw the pearl all the way on top of the platform, and it could end up teleporting you onto the side or even the bottom of an island. In these cases, equip blocks or water as quickly as possible. Blocks can allow you to block clutch on the side so you don't fall back down, and water can be used to break your fall or even save you from a seemingly unwinnable situation by pearling into the underside of an island, placing water on it, and pearling into it again so that you can float above the void. Once you've practiced all 3 of these types of clutches, you'll be seeing big improvements in your games. Less fall damage, fewer void deaths, and probably some cool clips for your Hypixel Skywars level 3 montage. So, now that we've got clutching down, let's move on to the fighting itself, starting with sprint resets. If you've ever watched a PvP tutorial or asked someone for tips, you've probably heard of something called W tapping. But while a lot of people know about it, not many know what it does or why it helps. W tapping is a form of something called sprint reset, which can be used to increase knockback during fights. See, when you're sprinting in a fight, your first hit does the normal amount of knockback, but every hit after that deals less. This is because of a line in Minecraft's code that reduces the knockback you deal by 40% and stops your sprint after every hit. In some cases, this doesn't really matter, but when your goal is to chain hits together or combo your opponent, you want as much knockback as possible. You want to keep your opponent a consistent distance away from you, so you can then use ping to your advantage. Because there's always a slight delay between your computer sending attack data and your enemy receiving the data, you can actually move in to hit them, then quickly move away, and by the time the attack registers on their end, you're already out of range. Repeat this a few times, and you've got yourself a combo that'll be difficult for them to get out of without pearling away or backing out of the fight completely. But if they aren't taking enough knockback, they'll get closer and closer until eventually your combo is broken. To combat this, we need to reset our sprint after every hit. This can be done in a lot of ways, but the most popular are W tap, S tap, Shift tap, and block hit, which each have their own unique advantages. W tap is the most common, and that's because it's the easiest. You simply stop after every hit. This is generally effective no matter what type of player you're up against, but it's ideal for players in a medium ping range, usually anything from about 50 milliseconds to 150. S-tapping is similar, but you move backwards instead of just stopping, which may be risky as you might move back too far, allowing your opponent to combo you instead. However, this is very useful for fights against players with low ping, as the lack of delay means you need to stay as far away from them as possible while carrying out your combo. The final methods are block hitting and shift tapping, which are unfortunately locked to specific versions of the game. Block hitting allows you to move forward non-stop, instead using the sword block mechanic to slow you down after every hit. This is a very easy trick, about as easy as W tapping, and it has the added benefit of potentially blocking incoming hits so you take less damage, but also the potential downside of missing a hit because you were blocking. Block hitting is easiest against players with high ping, but it's generally pretty effective no matter who you're battling. It's my sprint reset of choice, but unfortunately, it can't be used in 1.9 or later versions because they replaced sword blocking with shields. Fortunately, they have their own method of sprint reset, shift tapping. This technically can be used before 1.9, but it's not as effective and very rarely worth it since it's by far the hardest method. Similar to block hitting, you continue moving forward but use your crouch key to slow you down. Starting in 1.9 though, and especially from versions 1.14 and onward, shift tapping has an added bonus. Crouching reduces the size of your player's hitbox. Normally, your player has a hitbox that's 1.8 blocks tall, but this shrinks to 1.65 from 1.9 onwards, and 1.5 from 1.14 onwards, making a smaller target for your enemy and even giving a small boost in your reach, which we'll discuss later. These four methods are all very useful, but you should consider them carefully depending on the situation. Chances are, though, that whatever method you choose, you won't be able to perfectly combo every time, and you will eventually break out of it. If you want your combos to last a little bit longer, combine your sprint resets with what's next, strafing. Everybody knows strafing, and not much needs to be explained on how it works. You move left and right, you dodge your opponent's attacks. Cool, easy, no problem. But it's also useful for slowing yourself down, which helps to keep distance from your enemy and continue a combo. The more changes in direction, the more you slow yourself down, and this can be used in a ton of different ways during PvP. One of the most popular ways is to strafe quickly and randomly, maybe even throwing a few jumps in there so that you stay out of range of your opponent and they can't predict your next move. I've personally found that this works really well in casual PvP, but when speed is added to the mix, it can throw you off a bit. In that case, I suggest going for longer strafes or even full-on circle strafes, where you basically just move forward and to the side to go in a circle around your enemy while you attack. These won't let you hold on to combos for quite as long as a good random strafe will, at least in my experience, but they're a great alternative for more fast-paced fights. Now that you've hopefully perfected your movement, it's time to move on to your opponent's movement and how you can manipulate it. One of the easiest ways to do this is through the use of projectiles like fishing rods, snowballs, and eggs. Chances are that, even if you don't use them yourself, you've seen somebody use them in game modes like Skywars, UHC, hardcore factions, and so on. But what you might be confused on is why they're used at all. The explanation is pretty simple though. Basically, on modded servers like Hypixel, every projectile you throw deals a small amount of knockback. When your opponent is sprinting forward, they effectively cancel each other out, meaning that if you were to continue throwing snowballs while an opponent runs at you, they'll basically freeze in place. If you combine this with hits, it has an effect similar to sprint resetting. Basically, you're able to hit them, then move out of their range before the data travels to their computer. So by the time the attack shows up on their screen, you're already far enough away that they can't hit you. Along with that, on Hypixel in particular, there's a glitch where hitting someone with a projectile just before you attack in melee will actually cause them to take double the damage, meaning you can not only combo them but kill them faster while doing it. But what about in game modes that don't have these projectiles like Bed Wars? Well, in that case, you have one more thing to try: block tricks. They function very similar to rod tricks and other projectile tricks, but, well, without the projectiles. Instead, you place a block on the ground in front of your opponent to stop them in place, then hit them backwards and jump forward or run around the block to continue the combo. These can be a bit trickier to get working, and it will take some practice to not accidentally block trick yourself in the process, but these can be extremely effective once you know what you're doing. While fishing rods and snowballs might be very useful, there's a type of projectile that's much more popular and much more helpful in PvP. You might have heard of it. It's called an arrow. Now, I'm sure that everyone knows that when you shoot a person with a bow, they get hurt, but bows can be used for more than just basic archery. You can use them as instant projectiles, they can increase your damage in melee, and you can even fly across the map at insane speeds if you have a punch bow. Let's start with that first one, using a bow and arrow for instant projectiles. It's very similar to a rod trick. You just aim, pull back, and let the arrow fly before it's fully charged to knock your opponent backwards. It takes a bit longer to pull off, but it does a little bit of damage at the same time, so fair trade-off I'd suppose. Not much else to say about it, so let's move to bow tagging. This isn't a feature of vanilla Minecraft, but a lot of practice, kitmap, and hardcore faction servers have a feature where hitting a player with a bow will tag them, which makes them take extra damage from melee and highlights their name tag so they're easier to target. It's a pretty basic part of these servers, but you would be surprised by how many people don't know about this, so I thought I would mention it. And finally, the most fun out of all of these in my opinion is bow boosting. This is super useful for running away, chasing someone that's running away, getting onto taller platforms if you can't place blocks, and a lot more. It also works on vanilla and pretty much any server that allows you to deal damage to yourself. How it works is, as you sprint forward, you pull your bow back, shoot the arrow as soon as you're able to, then jump up and let the arrow punch you further in whatever direction you're running. If you're doing this for speed, you do need the bow to be enchanted with some level of the punch enchantment, but even normal bows can boost you up onto tall platforms. No matter what though, the punch enchantment is absolutely worth it. Even level 1 punch can make a huge difference in chases, and punch 2 or 3 essentially means there's no chance anyone's getting away, even if they have ender pearls, speed, or anything else. You can even chain these bow shots together to cross huge gaps and basically fly through the map. These can be a bit tricky to get the hang of though, so I have a few tips for you. For bow boosts of any kind, you'll want to adjust how long you pull back the bow depending on what your ping is. If you have low ping, up to maybe 100 milliseconds, you'll want to fire the bow as soon as possible. But as your ping goes higher, you'll want to pull the bow back for longer, because high ping will cause the shot to delay and it won't hit you unless you pull back longer and shoot it farther. You'll also want to aim a little bit upwards when you fire the bow for your first boost, and if you're trying to fly with the bow, you'll want to aim a little bit downwards for every boost you do midair. With a bit of practice, bow boosts can put you on the top of pretty much any PvP server where it's possible. It's criminally underrated outside of kit PvP servers, and combined with everything else we've talked about, it's enough to win almost any fight you want. So, now you've hopefully got a pretty good grasp of the major mechanics of Minecraft PvP, but there's still a few things we haven't talked about yet that are still very important. Let's start with a bit of a controversial one, which is your clicking speed. Most PvPers will agree that high CPS, or clicks per second, is important in PvP, but a few have argued that it's not necessary or even that it's entirely useless. Unfortunately, that's not fully true. CPS can be extremely important for three main things: knockback reduction, bridging, and first strikes. First strikes are pretty easily explained. When you attack faster, you'll probably attack your enemy before they can attack you, which can lead into a combo. This doesn't make a huge difference in most cases, but if your opponent is very slow at clicking, maybe 4 CPS or below, this gives you a big advantage. Knockback reduction, on the other hand, is a lot more complicated and a lot more helpful. Something that not a lot of people know is that when you send an attack packet on the same tick as you get attacked, you'll only take 60% of the knockback that you would normally take, similar to how you only deal 60% of knockback if you aren't sprinting. So, the faster you click, the higher chance that you'll try to attack your enemy on the same tick that you get attacked, which causes you to take a smaller amount of knockback than normal. If you're playing a game mode where falling off your platform is an issue, like in Sky Wars, Bed Wars, or Sumo, this is extremely useful for staying on top. But even outside of these game modes, taking low knockback allows you to carry combos longer and gives your opponent fewer chances to heal or run away. And finally, bridging with a higher click speed means you can place blocks faster, which allows you to do bridging methods like breezily bridging or god bridging without complicated timing. Outside of CPS though, there's a few other lesser known methods of turning a fight in your favor. One of these is getting the low ground. Contrary to what you might expect, you do not want the high ground. In this situation, you want to be Anakin, you want to stay below your opponent. The reason why is that in Minecraft, reach is measured in a bit of a weird way. Minecraft measures reach by calculating the distance between your head and the center of your opponent's hitbox. So, if you're below your opponent, it's easier to reach the center of their hitbox than it is for them to reach the center of yours. It's quite complicated and hard to explain, but it's not exactly difficult to demonstrate. Just try fighting somebody on ladders and you'll quickly be able to tell that the low ground is a huge advantage. So try to get the low ground in fights as much as possible. And finally, I have a small running speed optimization for you. Almost everybody knows that sprint jumping is faster than just sprinting, but there's actually a third method of movement that can be even faster: diagonal sprinting. If you're playing on a server with HCF, practice, or kit PvP, chances are that you play with some level of speed. Speed 2 is the most common, but depending on which kit you pick, you might have a bit more or less. But if you're chasing somebody, the fastest way to move is not just sprint jumping. With speed 2 and above, sprint jumping will actually lose time over just regular sprinting, since jumping reduces the speed effect. Instead, if you want to go faster than sprinting, aim diagonally and hold forward and to the side to strafe towards your enemy. It can be a bit awkward to aim, but this actually makes you move just a little bit faster, and it's enough to win chases or get away from your enemy if they don't realize what you're doing, which most people surprisingly don't. But there's still one very important part of PvP, at least to those in the 1.9 Anarchy community, that we haven't talked about here. One that a lot of people got mad at me for excluding in my History of PvP video. Sorry about that, but it's here now. Crystal PvP. This is something that I admittedly have very little experience with, but I will give tips and an explanation to the best of my ability. Crystal PvP works by taking advantage of the explosive nature of end crystals to deal incredible amounts of damage to your opponent. To attack someone with an end crystal like this, you first need to place down a block of obsidian, then place an end crystal on top and detonate it. But if you're close enough to make the crystal explode, wouldn't it hurt you too? The answer is yes, which is why you have to do it in a very specific way, and this is what I've seen most new crystal PvPers, including myself, struggle with at the start. When you place an end crystal, you want it to be on the same level or below your opponent. If the end crystal is above your opponent, it will do little to no damage, since explosions just don't do much damage from above. That's something you might have seen in speedrunning, for example, where speedrunners stand under the portal tower thing and explode beds above themselves to kill the dragon. But if you're on the same level as the crystal or above it, it does tons of damage, enough to kill players in one hit if you do it well enough. Because of this, you'll want to carry lots of totems of undying so that you can survive longer than a few seconds, but other than that, crystal PvP is fairly simple in its mechanics. Most of the skill comes out in the strategies and speed used in the fights, and if you can perfect that, you'll be running your local Anarchy server in no time at all. That's gonna be it for the video. I hope you all enjoyed. This ended up being really long, a lot longer than I expected, so I apologize for that, but I think I got pretty much everything that I know about. I'm sure I missed some parts of PvP and other parts like potions and healing I intentionally left out for simplicity, but hopefully nothing too major is missing. Not much else to say other than that I hope I helped, good luck practicing, and have fun. But yeah, that's it, so have a good one. Peace.
Over, Anakin! I have the ground! You underestimate my power! Don't try it!